that if I could work in a restaurant and become a member of the United States Congress, so can you. What we need to do in radically deep problems is propose radically visionary solutions. Because radical doesn't mean crazy. Radical means addressing the root, addressing the rot. And that is why we have proposed a Green New Deal for the future of America. This is what organizing looks like. Right. This is what building power looks like. This is what changing the country looks like. It's when we choose to show up and occupy the room and talk about the things that matter most, talking about our future. You know, Reverend, you bring up a funny anecdote, and I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working retail, folding clothes for other people to buy. There is nothing wrong with preparing the food that your neighbors will eat. There is nothing wrong with driving the buses that take your family to work. There is nothing wrong with being a working person in the United States of America, and there is everything dignified about it. I, in fact, am encouraged when people remind the country of my past, not because of anything about my story, but because it communicates that if I could work in a restaurant and become a member of the United States Congress, so can you. So can you. And so what we are fighting for are the policies that are concentrated in working people and communities of color and the historically disenfranchised to make that more possible in America, to make us be a nation that keeps its promise and lives up to the words in our founding charter. So I want to thank you all again for joining us here today. And I think it's a very important morning, because with our work, and if we organize, and if we fight like we've never fought before, then it is entirely possible that we just listened to someone who will be the next president of the United States this morning. I was reflecting last night on what I kind of wanted to share with you all today, and I'm again so grateful and thankful for the opportunity to be here. And so as a result, I was nervous, because this is a big deal. And, last night, yesterday, April 4th, marked the 51st anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And I found myself reflecting on this deeply, because it was in studying King as a young person that truly launched me to form a worldview that I have today. And I find so much of this present moment to really be a revival and a picking up of where King left off. That is what this moment is all about. But for a figure that was so widely lauded and is so widely commended in our history, so much about King's legacy is hidden in plain sight. So much of what he did is not discussed in our schoolrooms. And we simply think that we knocked on a door and asked for the right to vote and got it. But we all know that that's not what happened. Moreover, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was taken from us at just 39 years old. He was taken too soon. And as his daughter, Bernice King, reminded the world yesterday, his life was robbed by hatred, white supremacy, racism, apathy, opposition to economic justice, and gun violence. But what does taken too soon mean? Because it doesn't just refer to Dr. King's age. It means that he was just getting started. It means that his critical role in passing the Civil Rights Act was just step one. And in fact, just 7 days after his assassination, Congress and the president signed a housing bill that was a direct honor of his legacy. for economic, social, and racial justice. We know around the time of King's death that he was organizing around economic justice.
Right.
The Civil Rights Act was passed, and we were moving into our next chapter as a nation. So he was organizing around economic justice. In fact, his To the Mountaintop speech the night before his passing was around laborers and unionized workers. He was imagining an America beyond Vietnam. He was speaking to the ideals that all labor has dignity, all while educating our country about our own history, and that the forces of bigotry and racism are not separate or particularly different from the fight for economic dignity. They are inextricable from it. Not only because racial injustice exacts itself economically, as we saw in 2008 when Black Americans faced a disproportionate burden of subprime loans. We don't just see it exact environmentally, as we saw with children drinking poisoned water in Flint, or in my own backyard, children breathing dirty air in the South Bronx. But also, bigotry, sexism, xenophobia are the easiest ways to avoid and divide substantive conversations of classism. Injustice of any kind is a loose thread on the fabric of society just waiting to catch. And it will catch if we do not address racism, if we do not address the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, if we do not address mass incarceration, if we do not address the disproportion of mental health care within our communities, if we do not address the injustices of our immigration system, if we do not address the injustices of education inequity, these are all loose threads just waiting to catch on society. And that is why, without addressing it, any policy, economic, environmental, healthcare, or otherwise, is just waiting to unravel. It is built on a house of cards. It is temporary. And that is why, in a time of radically deep problems that we see today, whether it is the growing influence of white supremacy, whether it is the rollback of consumer protections by this administration, whether it is the agenda of Betsy DeVos, what we need to do in radically deep problems is propose radically visionary solutions. Because radical doesn't mean crazy. Radical means addressing the root, addressing the rot. And that is why we have proposed a Green New Deal for the future of America. That is why within that legislation, and rather within that resolution, we do not shy away from bold conversations of healthcare, housing, and education as human rights, of living wages and dignified work, of policy that isn't just drafted with the next election in mind, but also with the next generation in mind. That is the moral, political, and economic underpinning of making bold investments and dignified jobs, because that is the necessary plan to fix the pipes in Flint and clean the air in the South Bronx, and to create unionized energy jobs for transitioning workers in Appalachia and West Virginia, for single-payer health care and Medicare for all, and tuition-free public colleges and universities to prepare our nation for the future, and for the end to mass incarceration, the war on drugs, examining and pursuing an agenda of reparations, and fixing the opioid crisis too. Yeah. Because one of the things that King taught us is that our destinies are linked and tied, and that is just a part of American philosophy as anything else. Because ultimately, ending injustice is about ending the root causes of despair. And in the words of King, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Thank you all very much.